Day 53. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. This week, FBI agents returned to the quiet streets of Catalina Foothills. But they weren't there to search for Nancy. They were knocking on doors, asking questions no one in the neighborhood had heard before. Questions about a vacant house that had been cleared out shortly before Nancy disappeared. Questions about every contractor, every construction worker who had been near her home in the weeks leading up to that night. For 8 weeks, this case has existed inside a single frame, a grainy doorbell camera image, a masked man standing on an elderly woman's porch in the middle of the night. That image became the story, but the questions the FBI is asking now suggest something critical. That frame may be far too small, because this is no longer a story about one masked figure on one night. The investigation has shifted, and the evidence is beginning to outline something far more deliberate. Something that may not have started on January 31st at all, but weeks earlier, with a visit no one noticed, and a pattern no one recognized, until it was too late. At the center of everything is a gap. 41 minutes. The time between when Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera went dark and when her pacemaker stopped sending signals to her phone. And within those 41 minutes, there is a narrower window. 14 minutes. A window the FBI now believes may hold the key to understanding everything. How many people were involved, how they moved through the house, and how they managed to take an 84-year-old woman, someone who could barely walk 50 yards on her own, out of her home without anyone noticing. And that is what this case has become. Not just the question of what happened to Nancy Guthrie, but what those 14 minutes reveal about the people behind it. Because if those minutes were not random, then neither was anything else. And if this was planned, then the planning did not begin that night. It began earlier, quietly, carefully, and completely unnoticed. Before we go deeper into the new questions, before we follow the trail into vacant houses, construction workers, and possible surveillance, we need to return to the beginning, to the night itself, because every lead in this case circles back to those dark hours between January 31st and February 1st. And everything we think we understand about this case starts there. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived alone in her home in the Catalina Foothills. She's just outside Tucson, Arizona, a place she had called home for decades. She was the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. Her life followed a routine. She had limited mobility. She relied on daily medication. And she wore a pacemaker that continuously synced data to her iPhone. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, everything appeared normal. Her family had taken her out to dinner. At approximately 9:30 p.m., they dropped her off at home. That moment, quiet, ordinary, uneventful, would become the last confirmed time anyone in her family saw her alive. The next morning was Sunday. Nancy was expected to attend her regular virtual church service. She never logged in. At first, it may not have seemed alarming, but when she remained absent, a friend grew concerned and contacted the family. By noon, her family was at her house. What they found did not make sense. Her phone was inside. Her wallet was inside. Her medication, the medication she needed every single day to survive, was exactly where she had left it. Everything was there, except Nancy. Deputies arrived at approximately 12:15 p.m. Within minutes, they understood this was not a routine missing person case. There was blood, drops of it on the front porch, and traces inside the home. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos made a statement shortly after. He believed Nancy had been taken against her will, likely in the middle of the night, and that she had not left the house voluntarily. This was an abduction. The FBI joined the investigation within days. Then on February 10th, they released the footage that would define the public's understanding of the case. Like a doorbell camera recording, it showed a man. He was wearing a ski mask, gloves, a holstered handgun, and carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack. At one point, he is seen reaching toward the camera. In another frame, he holds a flashlight in his mouth while pressing vegetation over the lens, deliberately blocking its view. The FBI described him as approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, with an average build. His identity remains unknown. That image, the porch figure, became the centerpiece of the case. But it wasn't the only development. In the days that followed, multiple ransom messages surfaced. They were sent to media outlets, including TMZ and local Tucson stations. The messages demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin in exchange for Nancy's safe return. They included deadlines. They included a real Bitcoin wallet address. But none of them were ever verified as authentic. And most importantly, no proof of life was ever provided. Nancy's family responded publicly. In an emotional appeal, Savannah Guthrie and her siblings said they had received the messages. They pleaded for their mother's return. They stated clearly they were willing to pay. But the deadlines passed. February 5th came and went. February 9th came and went. Nothing happened. No follow-up, no contact, no confirmation that Nancy was even alive. The messages continued briefly, some from individuals claiming to have information about the kidnapper, demanding payment in exchange for a name. But investigators did not send any money. An analyst reviewing the messages noted something unusual. The writing style across multiple ransom notes appeared consistent, as if they had been written by the same person. At the same time, certain language choices suggested the author might not be American, or worse, that the entire ransom thread could be a hoax. Meanwhile, investigators moved quickly to eliminate potential suspects. Nancy's family was fully cleared. There was no evidence linking them to the disappearance. And as the search intensified, a reward was announced: $1 million for any information leading to Nancy Guthrie's return. 8 weeks later, no arrests have been made, no suspect has been publicly identified, and Nancy Guthrie has not been found. That is the surface of the case, the version the public sees. But beneath that surface, beneath the headlines, the footage, the speculation, there is something else: a forensic timeline, precise, fragmented, and quietly reconstructed by investigators. Because what happened that night did not happen all at once. It happened in stages. And the first stage begins at a single timestamp, 1:47 a.m. The most critical layer of this case begins with a timestamp, 1:47 a.m. At that exact moment, on the morning of February 1st, the Nest doorbell camera mounted at Nancy Guthrie's front door stopped transmitting. This was not a malfunction. It did not fail on its own. Footage later recovered by the FBI shows exactly what happened. A gloved hand reaches toward the lens. In one frame, the masked figure is visible holding a flashlight between his teeth, both hands free, while pressing vegetation directly over the camera to block its view. This was deliberate, controlled, and precise. Whoever did this knew the camera was there. They knew exactly where it was positioned. And more importantly, they had already decided how to disable it. This was not improvisation. This was preparation. 1:47 to 2:12 a.m., the silence for the next 25 minutes, there is nothing. No video, no motion alerts, no digital trace of activity inside or outside the house. A complete blackout. This silence is one of the most unsettling aspects of the case, because it represents a period of time where something happened, but no system recorded it. 2:12 a.m., motion detected. At 2:12 a.m., the silence breaks. When the home surveillance system registers motion, but not video, only a trigger, an alert indicating that something moved within the range of one of the exterior cameras. What exactly caused that motion is unknown. Sheriff Chris Nanos later stated that it could have been a person, or it could have been something as ordinary as an animal passing through the yard. There is no way to confirm which, and that ambiguity matters, because what happens next gives that moment an entirely different weight. 2:28 a.m., the final signal. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker records its final sync with her iPhone. Then, nothing. The signal stops. It never reconnects. Her phone is later found inside the house, but Nancy is not. That single moment, 2:28 a.m., marks the last confirmed digital trace of her presence. The digital skeleton. 3 timestamps: 1:47, 2:12, 2:28. Together, they form what investigators describe as the digital skeleton of the night Nancy disappeared. From the first event to the last, 41 minutes. And within those 41 minutes, investigators have focused intensely on a narrower window. The 14 minutes between 2:12 and 2:28, because whatever happened during those 14 minutes may explain everything. What do the 14 minutes mean? There are two primary interpretations, and each one leads to a very different version of events. Scenario 1, the suspect left at 2:12. If the motion detected at 2:12 was the masked suspect leaving the property, then something unusual happens. Nancy's pacemaker continues communicating with her phone for another 14 minutes after he is already gone, which would mean Nancy was still inside the house, still within Bluetooth range, for 14 minutes, alone, no captor present. That raises difficult questions. Was she conscious? Did she attempt to call for help? Was she already incapacitated? Or did something else happen inside that house during those 14 minutes that we still don't understand? Scenario 2, someone else arrived at 2:12. There is another possibility, one that changes the entire structure of the timeline. If the motion at 2:12 was not someone leaving, but someone arriving, then the situation becomes very different. It suggests that while one individual was already inside the house with Nancy, a second person approached from outside. In that case, the 14-minute gap does not represent Nancy being alone. It represents the final stage of a coordinated operation. A handoff, an extraction, a controlled removal of a target. 41 minutes inside the house. Former homicide detective Ted Williams reviewed this timeline and made a critical observation. Spending 41 minutes inside a victim's home is highly unusual. In most burglaries or abductions, intruders want to minimize exposure. They move quickly, they leave quickly. But 41 minutes suggests something else entirely. Comfort, familiarity, control. Williams stated that the duration indicates the individuals involved likely understood the home's layout, the camera system, and the risk of detection. They knew they had time, and they used it. 2:36 a.m., the vehicle. 8 minutes after the pacemaker signal stops. At approximately 2:36 a.m., a Ring doorbell camera located about 2.5 miles from Nancy's home captures a vehicle driving through the area. The footage was later obtained and published by Fox News. Investigators have not confirmed whether the vehicle is connected to the case, but the timing is difficult to ignore. 8 minutes is enough time. Enough time to move an 84-year-old woman into a vehicle. Enough time to leave a quiet residential street. Enough time to reach a road several miles away. Activity before the night. The timeline does not begin at 1:47 because investigators recovered additional images from motion-activated cameras positioned around Nancy's pool, backyard, and side yard. These were not videos, only thumbnail images triggered by movement. In and according to sources, while nothing suspicious was captured on the night of the abduction, there were multiple instances in the days and weeks before where unidentified individuals appeared in those areas. Unexplained, unidentified, and never publicly accounted for. One timeline, two possibilities. The digital evidence tells a story, but it doesn't tell it completely. It gives us structure, but not certainty. 3 timestamps, 41 minutes, a 14-minute gap, and within that structure, 2 competing interpretations. One suspect, or more than one. A single intrusion, or a coordinated operation. Because while the timeline is precise, there is something else at that house. Something physical, something visible, a detail that challenges the idea that this was ever just one person. And once you see it, the entire theory begins to change. Up to this point, the case can still be interpreted in a relatively simple way. One masked individual, one point of entry, one night. But there is a physical detail at Nancy Guthrie's home that complicates that entire theory. And once you factor it in, the idea of a single intruder becomes difficult to sustain. The gate Nancy Guthrie's front door was not directly exposed. It was protected by a heavy metal security gate. Not a decorative barrier, not a screen door, a reinforced gate, common in the Southwest, designed specifically to prevent forced entry. From the outside, it is meant to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to breach without leaving visible damage. And according to investigators, there is no evidence that it was forced open. No damage. No signs of tampering, which leads to a critical question. If the front entrance was secured, how did anyone get inside? The neighbor's observation. A neighbor named Laura, who has a nearly identical gate at her own home, provided insight that has since become central to this case. Speaking to News Nation correspondent Brian Enton, she explained what that type of gate means in practical terms. "You're not getting in from the outside," she said. "You're never going to break into that gate." Her conclusion was direct. If the gate was locked that night, then the masked man seen on the doorbell camera could not have entered through the front door. What was he doing? Laura went further. She studied the footage closely, and what she saw did not look like someone trying to force entry. It looked like something else. Waiting. One of the masked figure stands at the threshold, looking through the door, not pushing, not prying, not attempting to break in, watching, as if expecting something to happen on the other side. "I think he was waiting for someone to come out," she said. That interpretation changes everything, because if he was waiting, then someone else may already have been inside. Multiple suspects. This is where the theory begins to shift. If one individual was inside the house and another was positioned at the front door, then this was not a single-person operation. It was coordinated. Laura believes there were at least two people involved, possibly three, one or more individuals entering through another access point, a back door, a window, or another unsecured entry, while the man at the front waited for them to bring Nancy out. Law enforcement has not ruled this out. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has publicly stated that the possibility of multiple suspects remains under active consideration. The logistics problem security experts reviewing the case have raised a broader issue. Not just how the entry occurred, but whether a single individual could realistically execute the entire sequence. Retired combat veteran and security consultant Kurt Dabb analyzed the available evidence and reached a clear conclusion. Based on logistics alone, he believes there may have been 2 to 4 accomplices involved. So his reasoning is straightforward. Disabling a camera, entering a secured home, navigating the interior, controlling and removing an elderly woman with limited mobility, doing all of this within a 41-minute window without alerting neighbors. That level of complexity is extremely difficult for one person to manage, especially without error, especially without noise, especially without being seen. The vacant house. Then there is another element, one that adds a layer of preparation to the entire situation. A vacant house. According to retired SWAT commander Bob Krigier, investigators are examining a nearby property that was vacated shortly before Nancy disappeared. He suggested that the house may have been used as a staging location, a place where individuals could blend into the neighborhood, observe daily routines, monitor movement in and out of Nancy's home, prepare without attracting attention. Because in a quiet residential area, a vacant property provides something invaluable, a reason to be there. If you're carrying tools near a construction site, no one questions it. If you're walking near an empty house, no one notices. You become part of the background, invisible in plain sight. Targeted questions. This may explain the shift in FBI questioning. Agents are no longer asking general questions. They are asking for names, specifically the names of contractors and workers who were present in the area in the days and weeks before Nancy disappeared. This level of specificity suggests something important. Investigators are no longer casting a wide net when they are narrowing their focus toward individuals who had legitimate reasons to be there and who could move through the neighborhood repeatedly without drawing suspicion. A different picture. At the beginning of this case, the image was simple. One masked man, one porch, one night. But now, that image is no longer enough, because when you add the security gate, the lack of forced entry, the behavior of the masked figure, the possibility of secondary access points, the complexity of the operation, the vacant house, and the focus on construction workers, a different picture begins to emerge. Not impulsive, not random, but structured, coordinated, planned. A shift in the question. The question is no longer just, who did this? The question is now, How long did this take to plan? Because if multiple people were involved, if entry required knowledge of the home, if timing was precise, then this did not begin on January 31st. It began earlier. And there is one date, a date that was not part of the public narrative for weeks. That may hold the first real indication of when it started. A night, 20 days before Nancy disappeared. A night when something happened and no one noticed. If this crime was planned, then the planning had to begin somewhere. And according to investigators, that point may not be January 31st. It may be a date that, for weeks, no one was paying attention to. January 11th, 20 days before Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home. A date that was never public. For nearly 7 weeks, January 11th was not part of the public narrative. It was not mentioned in press briefings. It did not appear in early reports. It was not discussed by investigators until the family brought it forward. On March 21st, Nancy's children released a statement urging the Tucson community to focus on 3 specific timeframes. January 31st, the early morning of February 1st, and the late evening of January 11th. That last date stood out immediately because it had never been publicly connected to the case before, and its sudden inclusion raised a critical question. Why would a night 20 days earlier matter? Law enforcement acknowledges. 2 days later, Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed that question. In an interview on March 23rd, he confirmed that investigators do believe something occurred on January 11th, but he stopped there. He did not describe what happened. He did not provide details. He did not explain what evidence led them to that conclusion, only that the date matters, and that the belief is supported by forensic analysis of digital data recovered from the home. Speculative, but not baseless. The trial run theory. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer offered a more direct interpretation. After reviewing the family's statement, she suggested that the language strongly indicates something specific, that the masked individual seen on the doorbell camera may have visited the property before, not to act, but to test, a trial run, an early approach to the house, weeks before returning to carry out the abduction. Images from different days. This theory gained further weight when Fox News reported that the doorbell images released by the FBI were not all from the same night. One, according to a source familiar with the case, at least 2 of those images were captured on different days, which means the masked figure was present at Nancy Guthrie's home more than once. That detail is small, but its implications are significant because it suggests repetition, familiarity, and intent. The dogs, there is one more detail, minor on its own, but difficult to ignore in context. A neighbor reported that on both January 11th and January 31st, his dogs woke him in the middle of the night. Not casually, but persistently. Agitated barking, the kind that suggests something unfamiliar outside. He stated that this behavior had not occurred before those nights and has not occurred since. 2 nights, 20 days apart. Same reaction. On another date, January 24th. Investigators have also asked residents about a third date, January 24th. No explanation has been provided for why this date is relevant, but its placement is notable exactly between January 11th and January 31st. If those 3 dates are connected, then a pattern begins to form. January 11th. Possible first visit, January 24th. Possible second pass, January 31st. Execution, 3 points. Spread across 20 days, each one potentially representing a step closer to the night Nancy disappeared. What a trial run would mean. If January 11th was a reconnaissance visit, then it wasn't random. It would have served a purpose, to observe the property, to study the layout, to understand camera placement, to identify blind spots, to measure response time. To see how long it would take for anyone to notice something was wrong. And based on what we now know, the answer may have been, no one noticed anything at all. Preparation, not chance. This is where the narrative shifts again, because if someone visited the house weeks earlier, if they returned again, if they adjusted their approach, then the abduction was not spontaneous. It was prepared, refined, executed. But there's a problem. The surveillance theory fits. It aligns with the timeline. It aligns with the camera behavior. It aligns with the idea of multiple individuals, but it does not exist alone, because there is another thread in this case, one that points in a completely different direction, and the two do not easily fit together. The other thread. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, multiple ransom messages began appearing, sent not to the family directly, but to media outlets, demanding money, demanding Bitcoin, setting deadlines, escalating pressure. At first glance, that suggests something else entirely, not a carefully planned, multi-week operation carried out by individuals embedded in the neighborhood, but something less controlled, more chaotic, possibly opportunistic, possibly fraudulent. Two competing narratives. Now the case holds two parallel explanations. Narrative 1, a coordinated operation, weeks of surveillance. Multiple individuals, local access and familiarity. Narrative 2, ransom messages, media contact, unverified claims. No proof of life, no follow-through. Both are supported by evidence, but they point in different directions, and investigators have not publicly stated which one they believe is closer to the truth. A turning point. January 11th changes the case because it introduces time, and once time is introduced, so is intention, because crimes that unfold over weeks are not accidents. They are decisions, repeated, refined, and eventually carried out. While one line of the investigation points toward planning, surveillance, and multiple suspects, another line points somewhere else entirely, to messages, to money, and to a possibility that complicates everything, that not all of the signals in this case are real. The first messages within days of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, multiple news outlets began receiving emails, not from investigators, not from the family, but from someone claiming to be connected to the abduction. The first messages arrived on February 1st and February 2nd. They were sent to TMZ and two Tucson television stations, and they contained demands, millions of dollars, in Bitcoin, along with a wallet address and deadlines. Two of them, 5 p.m. on February 5th, 5 p.m. on February 9th. Each deadline carried implied consequences if the demands were not met. Why investigators took them seriously? At first, ransom notes are often treated with caution. Many are hoaxes. Many are attempts to exploit attention around a high-profile case. But these messages had something different. Details. According to law enforcement and journalists who reviewed the content, the first ransom message included specific references to Nancy's Apple Watch, a floodlight at her home, details that had not been made public at the time, which means whoever wrote that message either had direct knowledge of the crime scene or had access to someone who did. That alone made the messages difficult to dismiss. The family's response. Nancy's family responded publicly. In an emotional video shared on social media, Savannah Guthrie and her siblings addressed the sender directly. They acknowledged receiving the message. They made their position clear. They were willing to comply. "We beg you now to return our mother to us," Savannah said. "This is very valuable to us, and we will pay." It was a direct appeal, clear, urgent, and public. The deadlines pass. Then came February 5th, nothing. Then February 9th, still nothing. No proof of life, no follow-up instructions, no direct communication with the family. The deadlines came and went, without any action from the person who set them. More messages. In the days that followed, additional messages appeared. At least one was sent to TMZ from an individual claiming not to be the kidnapper, but to have information about the kidnapper's identity. The demand? 1 Bitcoin, approximately $65,000 at the time, in exchange for a name. The FBI did not pay. A single author? Journalists who reviewed the full set of messages noticed something consistent. The writing style. Across multiple communications, the tone, structure, and phrasing appeared similar, suggesting they may have come from the same person. Additionally, certain language patterns suggested familiarity with the Tucson area, but there was also a contradiction. A retired FBI agent analyzing the messages pointed out the use of the term USD to refer to dollars, a convention that, in his view, an American writer would be less likely to use in this context, which introduces another possibility, that the sender may not be local, or that the entire sequence of messages may be a fabrication. Two directions, one case. This is where the case becomes difficult to reconcile, because the ransom messages suggest one type of scenario, while the surveillance timeline suggests another. The ransom thread suggests communication through media. Changing demands no follow-through, no proof of life, possible opportunism, possible deception. The surveillance thread suggests weeks of preparation, physical presence in the neighborhood, knowledge of the home-controlled execution. Multiple individuals, structured planning. Each one is supported by evidence, but they do not naturally align. Local versus remote. The contrast becomes even clearer when viewed from a logistical perspective. The surveillance theory points to someone local, someone with access to the neighborhood, possibly through construction work or nearby properties, someone who could move through the area repeatedly without being noticed. But the ransom messages point outward, to digital communication, to Bitcoin transactions, to media outlets, possibly to someone operating at a distance. A fragmented picture. Individually, each piece of evidence makes sense, but together, they do not form a single, coherent narrative. They form competing narratives, and investigators have not publicly stated which one they believe is accurate, or whether both are connected, or whether one is simply noise. The problem of noise. In high-profile cases, false leads are common. People insert themselves into the story. They send messages, they make claims, they attempt to profit from attention. But the difficulty here is that the ransom messages are not entirely dismissible because of the details they contain, and that uncertainty keeps them relevant. A case divided. At this point, the investigation is split across two paths, one grounded in physical evidence, the other in digital communication, one pointing toward planning and proximity, the other toward messaging and ambiguity. And then there is the DNA. If there is a way to resolve this contradiction, it may not come from timelines, or surveillance, or messages. It may come from something else entirely, something recovered from inside the house, something that does not belong, a DNA sample, mixed, difficult to isolate, but potentially decisive. If the ransom messages create uncertainty, then the DNA may be the one element that can cut through it, because unlike speculation, DNA does not guess, it identifies. The DNA sample inside Nancy Guthrie's home, investigators recovered a sample. It did not belong to Nancy, and it did not match anyone known to have regular contact with her. That alone makes it significant. But the sample is not clean. It is mixed DNA. Genetic material from more than one individual, combined in a way that makes separation and identification far more complex. This is not a single, clear profile. It is layered, overlapping, and difficult to interpret. What investigators said Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed the DNA publicly. "We have some DNA that we think is still workable," he said, "and we have labs around this country who are working diligently to get there with this." The wording matters. Workable does not mean solved, it means possible. The strategy, genetic genealogy. Investigators are not relying solely on traditional database matching. They plan to use investigative genetic genealogy, the same method that helped identify the Golden State Killer. The process is slow. It involves comparing fragments of DNA against genealogical databases, identifying distant relatives, and building family trees outward until a potential suspect emerges. It can take weeks, sometimes months, and in cases involving mixed DNA, there are no guarantees. While the DNA waits, as the DNA sits in labs, other leads have come and gone. Some appeared promising, most did not hold. The gloves. In the days following Nancy's disappearance, investigators collected 16 pairs of gloves from areas surrounding her home. One pair stood out. Black gloves found along a roadside approximately 2 miles away. They appeared similar to the gloves worn by the masked individual in the doorbell footage. They were processed, entered into the FBI's National DNA Database, and eventually traced to a local restaurant worker. Someone who, and according to investigators, had no connection to the case. 16 pairs collected, and the most promising one led nowhere. The traffic stop. Another lead surfaced quickly. A man named Carlos Palazuelo was detained during a traffic stop in Rio Rico, about 60 miles south of Tucson, near the Mexican border. The timing was notable. It happened on the same day the FBI released images of the masked suspect. His home was searched. For a brief moment, it appeared investigators might have a direction. Then just hours later, he was released. He told reporters he had no idea who Nancy Guthrie was. No charges were filed. The border theory. At one point, Mexican authorities in the state of Sonora confirmed that the FBI had informed them there were no active leads suggesting Nancy had been taken across the border, which effectively closed off another possibility, at least for now. No suspects, no arrests. Despite the scale of the investigation, no suspect has been publicly identified. No one has been arrested, no charges have been filed, and Nancy Guthrie has not been found. But the case is not cold. Behind the scenes, investigators insist the opposite. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer described the investigation as red hot. According to her, the volume of incoming leads is overwhelming, like drinking from a fire hose. If that is accurate, then the silence from law enforcement is not due to inactivity. It is a choice. The secrecy problem. That choice has created tension. Coffindaffer publicly questioned what she described as a cloak and dagger approach. Her point was direct. If investigators want help from the public, why withhold so much information? What investigators say they know? Sheriff Nanos has stated that investigators believe they understand why Nancy's home was targeted, that the abduction was not random, that Nancy herself was the intended target, but he has not disclosed the motive. He has not explained the reasoning. He has not shared the details. All of it remains withheld in the name of preserving the integrity of the investigation. A contradiction. At the same time, Nanos has issued a warning to the public. Do not think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you are safe, which creates a contradiction. On one hand, the crime was targeted. On the other, the threat may still exist. Growing frustration. The lack of transparency has not gone unnoticed. Public frustration has grown, to the point where Sheriff Nanos now faces a recall effort from members of his own community. Residents who believe the pace and openness of the investigation has fallen short of what the case demands. The missing video. Then there is another detail, one that raises questions about timing. The last known footage of Nancy Guthrie alive, captured inside an Uber vehicle, was not obtained by the FBI until 47 days after she disappeared. Nearly 7 weeks before investigators secured what may be the final moving image of her. No explanation has been publicly provided for that delay. A case of fragments. At this stage, the investigation is built on fragments, DNA that is difficult to isolate, physical evidence that leads to dead ends, digital timelines with multiple interpretations, messages that may or may not be real,
She lives
leads that appear and disappear. Each piece matters, but none of them on their own solve the case.
A retirement city,
But there is something
warm
else.
weather, wide streets,
Investigators
the
are
kind of place
not
where
just
neighbors
looking
know
at
each other's
individual
routines.
pieces.
She is also
They are
the mother
looking
of
at
Savannah
connections,
Guthrie,
quietly,
co-host of NBC's Today
carefully,
Show, one of the
building
most
something
recognizable
larger,
faces in American
a
morning
pattern,
television. But
not
Nancy
from any
herself,
single piece of
she was
evidence,
private,
but from
low
how those
profile,
pieces fit
an
together.
elderly woman living
A
alone
pattern
in the
emerging
desert
connections
Southwest.
between
And on
the
the morning of
security
February
gate and
1st,
forced entry
she
that
vanished.
never happened.
The Pima County
The
Sheriff's
January
Department
11th
released a
visit and
statement
possible
saying they believe
surveillance,
Nancy Guthrie
the
was
vacant
abducted,
house and unexplained
taken against
presence
her
in the
will
neighborhood,
in the early
the
hours of
41 minutes
February
inside
1st.
the home,
Not a
and the
wellness check
confidence
gone
it
sideways.
suggests
Not a
individually.
confused senior
Each
who wandered
detail
off.
can be explained
The word
away.
they used was abducted.
Together,
That word
they
carries
begin
weight,
to point in the
and it
same
immediately
direction,
raised a question
and
that
that
nobody could
direction
answer.
is clear.
Why her?
This was not
On
impulsive.
February 10th,
This was
9
not
days after
random.
Nancy disappeared,
This was not
the
a mistake.
FBI stepped stepped in
It was
publicly.
organized.
They
It
released
was
surveillance
coordinated.
images pulled from her
And it
Nest
may have been
doorbell
unfolding
camera.
long before
Grainy,
anyone realized something
time-stamped,
was wrong.
but clear enough to
By
tell a
now,
story.
every major
A
piece of this
masked
case has
man
been laid out.
standing near her home.
The timeline,
His face
the
covered,
surveillance,
his body language
the ransom
deliberate,
messages,
not rushed,
the
not
DNA,
panicked, calm,
the physical
like
layout
someone who
of the
had been there
home.
before.
Individually,
And here's the first
each element
detail that
raises
stopped
questions.
investigators cold.
But when you stop
One of
looking
those
at them in
images was taken on
isolation
a completely
and
different
begin
date than the
connecting them,
others.
a
Not the
pattern
night she
starts to
disappeared,
emerge. Not
even
one
close
piece,
to it.
but the
A
connections
separate
on their
date
own.
entirely.
The details can be
Confirmed
dismissed.
by a source
The
with
motion at
direct knowledge of
212
the
could have been an
investigation.
animal. The vacant
So,
house could
what
be
does that tell
coincidence.
us?
The ransom
It tells
messages
us
could be a
this
hoax.
wasn't impulsive.
The doorbell
This
footage
wasn't
could show the
random.
only suspect
Someone had
involved.
visited that address before.
Each explanation
Someone
is
had studied
possible,
it, stood on those
individually.
steps,
But when these
and left.
elements are placed
and
side
then
by
came
side,
back. Here's where
they
this
begin
case
to
gets truly
reinforce each other.
unsettling.
And the
Because more you look
probability
at
of
the timeline,
coincidence begins
the more
to
you
shrink.
realize just how long this
Start
may have
with
been in
January
motion.
11th.
Authorities
Investigators
haven't
have
just
already
asked neighbors to
indicated that
check footage
January
from the
11th
night Nancy
matters.
disappeared.
A date
They've
supported
asked for
by
video
digital
covering the
forensic
entire
analysis.
month of January.
A date a former
31
FBI
days.
agent
Specific
describes
dates
as a
have
likely
surfaced through law
trial run.
enforcement requests
A night
and
when a
neighbor
neighbor's
accounts.
dogs reacted to
January
something
11th,
unusual.
January 24th,
A night when,
and the window
based on
between
later
January
evidence,
31st
someone
and
may have been
February
near
2nd,
or
the
at
hours
the
surrounding
property.
her disappearance.
This was not the
Each of those
abduction,
dates
it was
represent
preparation,
something. A sighting,
test,
a vehicle,
an initial
a
approach.
moment investigators are trying
Then
to lock
January
down.
24th.
A retired NY
Another
PD
date
inspector
investigators
and
have
Fox
asked
News
about,
contributor laid out
without
exactly
explanation,
what that kind of request
positioned
signals.
almost
There are
exactly
two
between January
possibilities,
11th
he said.
and January
Then the
31st.
hopeful one,
If the sequence
investigators
holds,
already have
January
a person of
24th may
interest,
represent a
and they're
second
trying to
visit,
place that
a
individual
refinement
in the
of the
neighborhood
plan,
across
a
multiple
confirmation
dates,
that
building a
nothing had
pattern,
changed,
building a case.
that the opportunity
The less
was still
hopeful
there.
One,
Then
something in the
January
forensic
31st
evidence has already
execution,
told them
not
that
a sudden act,
unusual activity was
but the
happening
final
in that
step in a
neighborhood
process that
over
may
an
have
extended
unfolded over
period.
weeks.
And now they're working
The role of the
backwards,
vacant
trying
house.
to understand the full
Now
scope
consider
of what
the
was being
vacant
planned.
property near
Either
Nancy's
way,
home.
one thing is clear.
Investigators
this
have
wasn't
focused
one
on it,
night.
not
this was an
casually,
operation,
but with
possibly
targeted
weeks
questions.
in the making.
Who
So,
was there?
Who is this man?
When did they leave?
As of now,
Who had
he
access?
remains unidentified.
Because a vacant house
FBI
provides
analysts
something
have given
critical.
us a profile based on the
Cover.
doorbell footage.
A
He's
legitimate
approximately
reason to
5
be
feet
present in
9
the
to 5
area.
feet 10 inches
A place
tall,
to observe
medium
without
build.
being questioned.
Find wearing a
A place to
25-liter
prepare
black
without
Ozark
being
trail
seen.
backpack, the
From
kind
that
you'd find
position,
at Walmart for under
someone could
$30. Deliberately
Nancy's
ordinary,
routines,
hard to trace,
track when
but
she was
here's the
alone,
detail that changes
observe
the
family
nature of this
visits,
case entirely.
learn neighborhood
Look
patterns,
closely at the
all without
footage,
drawing
and
attention.
investigators
The
have.
construction
And
workers
you can
layer
see
onto
what
that
appears to be
the
a
presence of
holstered
construction
pistol,
activity in the
positioned
area.
near his groin.
Workers moving in
Not
and out,
visible unless you're looking
vehicles
for it.
coming and going,
This wasn't just someone
unfamiliar
pacing a
faces
house.
that quickly
This
become
was someone
part
who
of the
came
background.
armed.
The
Someone who came
FBI is not
prepared.
asking vague questions
and then
anymore.
There's January
They are
11th.
asking for
On
names,
that same date,
specific
the first date
individuals,
investigators flagged
people
for
who
neighbors
had
to check their
repeated
ring camera
legitimate
footage.
access
the
to the
masked
neighborhood,
man appears again.
people who could be
But this
present
time, no
without
backpack,
anyone thinking
no
twice.
holster, a different
The security
configuration
gate
entirely,
revisited.
Which
Now
raises
return
the
to the
question,
front of the house,
what
the
was
security
January
gate.
11th?
If
A
it was
reconnaissance
locked
visit,
and there
a
is no
test run,
evidence it was
something else?
forced,
We don't know
then the
yet.
masked man
But
on the porch
investigators
did not enter
clearly
through
believe
it.
that date
He stood
means
there,
something.
looking
Here's what
inside,
makes this even more
waiting,
chilling.
which
People in that
implies
neighborhood
something
noticed
critical.
Something was off.
Someone else
Weeks
was already
before
inside.
Nancy disappeared.
Someone
A
who
post on the
entered
Ring
through a
Neighbors
different
app
access
appeared
point.
early in the investigation.
Someone who knew how to
asked
move through
residents
the
to check
home,
footage from 9
possibly
p.m.
in the
to
dark.
midnight on January 11th.
The 41 minutes.
It also flagged a suspicious
Then there is the
vehicle
time.
seen on Via and
41
Strada,
minutes
a street
inside
near
the
Nancy's
house.
home, around
Not
10
rushed,
a.m. on
not
January
chaotic,
31st.
not reactive,
One day before
but
she vanished.
controlled.
No
An
description of the
intruder who
vehicle
stays
was
that
given.
long is not
Just
guessing.
check
He
your
is
footage.
following a sequence,
And then there's
one
Aldi
that has been
Meister.
considered in
She's
advance,
a local homeowner.
one that
She spoke to
assumes
Fox News
no
Digital back in
interruption,
February.
no detection,
And
no
what she
immediate
described
response.
As the kind of thing that
Confidence
feels
requires
insignificant
knowledge.
In the moment,
That level
and
of
haunting in
confidence does not
hindsight.
come from chance.
She saw a man
It comes
walking
from
through
knowledge.
the neighborhood in
Knowledge of
mid-January.
the
And
home's
alone,
layout, the
moving
camera
through the area
placement,
at
the
an
neighborhood's
unusual pace.
activity patterns,
He didn't
the
have your
likelihood of
typical walking
response
gear
which
on,
suggests
she said.
familiarity.
His hat was pulled really
Not
far
just
over
with
his
the
eyes.
house, but with
Just
the
a man
environment
walking.
around it.
Nothing you'd call
The final
police
question, question.
Nothing you'd
All
think
of this
twice
leads to a
about,
question that
unless
has
you
been
knew what was
present from the
coming.
beginning,
Let's be honest about
but
what
now
this case
carries
still
more
hasn't
weight than
answered,
ever.
because there's a lot.
Who would go to these
We don't
lengths
know who took Nancy
for an
Guthrie.
84-year-old
We don't know why
woman
she was
living alone?
targeted, whether
What the
this was
evidence
personal,
suggests,
financial,
the pattern
random,
does
or
not
something
point
else
to
entirely.
a random
We don't know where
predator
she is.
or a
We don't
burglar
know if
who
the
chose the wrong
suspicious
house.
vehicle on Via Entrada
Instead,
is
it
connected
points
to the
towards
masked
something
man in
else,
the doorbell
a group,
footage. And we don't
Individuals
know what happened in the
who
hours between
identified
January
Nancy
31st
Guthrie as a
and
target,
February 2nd,
observed her
that
over time,
authorities keep circling back
established
to.
presence in the
What
neighborhood,
we do know is this:
studied her
the
home,
FBI
disabled
is
her
involved.
security system,
Multiple law
entered
enforcement
through a
sources are
secondary
talking.
access point,
Neighbors
and
are still
removed
being
her within a
asked to hand over
controlled time
footage.
window,
And the
possibly
investigation
with
is
one
still
individual
active.
positioned at
That
the front,
last part matters,
waiting.
because active
Not an
investigations
event,
mean they haven't
a
given
process.
up. They're still building
If this
towards something.
reconstruction is
Nancy
even
Guthrie
partially
has been missing
accurate,
for over a month.
then what happened
She
to
is
Nancy
someone's
Guthrie
mother,
was not a
someone's
single event.
grandmother.
It was a
And
process,
somewhere in that quiet
a sequence
Tucson
of
neighborhood,
decisions,
on a night
executed
that neighbors
over
didn't
time,
think to check their cameras,
and it may not be
she was
over.
taken.
Sheriff
The masked man
Nanos
on her
has
front
made
steps
one
3
point
weeks
clear.
earlier knew exactly
Do not
what he
think
was
for a
doing.
minute that
And
because
right
it
now,
happened to the Guthrie
investigators
family,
are trying to
you
figure
are
out
safe.
who he is before
Because if
that
this
trail
was
goes
targeted,
cold.
and if
you
the
live in
people
Tucson
responsible
area,
are still out there,
specifically near Nancy
then the
Guthrie's
conditions that
neighborhood,
allowed
and
this
you
to
haven't
happen
already checked your
may
home
still
security
exist.
footage from January.
An
Law
incomplete picture.
investigators are still
Despite
asking.
everything,
That footage could matter.
the picture
if
is
this
not
case is new
complete.
to you, I'll link
There has
everything in the
been
description below.
no arrest,
and if
no
you want to stay
confirmed
updated as
suspect,
this
no
develops,
public motive,
subscribe.
no
Hit the bell,
resolution.
because when something
The
breaks on this
DNA
story,
is still being
we'll be covering
processed.
it.
The
Stay
investigation
curious,
is
stay
ongoing,
skeptical,
and the
I'll see you in
identity of the
next
masked
one.
figure remains unknown. The pattern is there. The connections are there.
Tracked and protected by
structure is there.
sophisticated digital
The intent
networks. She resided
appears
in
to
what
be
was
there,
essentially a
but the
modern digital
name
fortress
is not.
built to repel intruders.
8 weeks into
This
the
is the crucial
investigation,
detail that
there
transforms
is
the
still no
case from a
suspect,
tragic mystery
no arrest,
into a
no
terrifying
confirmed motive,
technological anomaly.
and Nancy Guthrie
You do
has
not
not been
install
found.
multiple smart
The
cameras
official
and
status,
carry synchronized
the Pima
medical
County
monitors
Sheriff's
if you
Department
are careless
and the
about your
FBI continue
personal
to
safety.
operate a joint
The
command
undeniable
center.
presence of these
Investigators
devices
are still
indicates a
actively
life
working the
lived with a
case.
high degree of
And
caution
publicly, they
and constant
maintain one
situational
position.
awareness.
They are
The
proceeding
technology
under the
was supposed to
assumption
be
that
an
Nancy may
impenetrable
still be
barrier
alive.
against the
But with
unpredictable
each passing
dangers of the
day,
outside world.
that
It was
assumption
supposed
becomes
to
harder to
provide
reconcile
lasting
with
peace of
reality.
mind for her and her
Nancy
extended
is
family,
84 years old.
including her
She
daughter
depends
Savannah
on daily
Guthrie,
medication,
who is a prominent
medication
national
that was left
television
behind
anchor.
in her home the
The
night she
extensive
disappeared.
security measures
Her
stand in
pacemaker,
stark contrast
a
to the
device
ultimate
designed
dark
to
outcome
continuously
of that
transmit
cold
data,
February night.
has
Why
not
do we
sent
need
a
to
signal
focus so
in
heavily
53
on the
days.
specific brand
A
of her
family
doorbell
between
camera
hope and
or
grief.
the precise
The
nature
language used
of
by
her medical
Nancy's family
monitor?
has begun
We
to
need to
shift,
look closely at these
subtly,
details because
but
they completely
unmistakably.
eliminate the
In a
leading
recent
theory of a
statement,
random
her
crime of
children said they
opportunity.
want to celebrate
A
her
random
life,
burglar looking for
her
quick
strength,
cash does
her
not target a
courage,
house bristling
but
with
cannot
visible
do
smart
so
lenses
until
and
she is
active
brought to a
security
final
nodes.
place of rest.
A
That
disorganized
is not
criminal
the
does not
language of
casually
certainty.
approach a front
It is the
door
language of
equipped
a
with a
family
glowing
caught
recording
between
device
hope
that streams
and
video
acceptance.
directly to a cloud server.
Savannah Guthrie's
The alleged
return.
perpetrator had to know
On March
exactly
5th,
what they were
Savannah
walking
Guthrie
into.
returned briefly
They
to
had to
Studio
understand
1A
the
in New
complex
York.
layout of her digital
was her first
defenses
appearance
before they
since her
ever
mother
set foot on the
disappeared.
property.
She spoke
This
openly,
reveals a truly
not as a
chilling level
journalist,
of premeditation
but as a daughter.
and extensive planning.
I don't know how
the
to come
suspect
back,
did not
she
just
said,
stumble upon
but
a
I don't
vulnerable
know how
house in
not
the
to.
dark. They
It
deliberately
was a moment
selected a
that
highly
reflected the
secure
reality of
target
the case.
and executed a
Life
flawless plan
continuing
to defeat those
while answers
specific
remain
technological
absent.
defenses.
The reward from
the
the
grand
beginning,
tragedy of
the
modern
family
home
has been
security
clear.
is the false
They want
sense of
information,
absolute safety
any
it provides
information,
to those living
and they are
behind
willing
its
to pay
invisible
for it.
wireless
A
walls.
$1 million
We blindly
reward was
trust
announced.
these flashing lights
Later,
and
it
wireless
increased.
signals to
With
act as our
contributions
ultimate
from the
infallible
FBI and local
protectors.
Crime Stoppers,
But the most
the total
dangerous
now exceeds
aspect of any advanced
$1.1 million.
technological system
And
is
there
a
is an
simple
important
and
detail.
deeply unsettling
The family has
reality.
stated that the reward can
Whatever
be paid
can be
in
turned
cash,
on can also be turned
anonymously.
off by someone who
No
knows exactly
identification
how to do
required.
it. The
That
timeline of the
detail
security
suggests something
breach
specific.
reveals exactly how
Then they
that technological shield was
that the person
dismantled
who knows
piece by
something
piece.
may be afraid to
The
come
incident did
forward,
not begin in the
afraid of being
chaotic early
identified,
hours of the morning,
afraid of
as one might
retaliation,
naturally expect
afraid
in
of
a home
involvement,
invasion scenario.
and still,
The first
no
ominous
breakthrough.
sign of trouble
Despite
appeared
the
much
size of the
earlier in the night,
reward,
according to leaked
there has been no
investigation
decisive
details.
lead.
CBS
No tip that
News cited
changes the
reliable
direction of the
sources,
case.
indicating
No
that the
piece
Nest
of
doorbell
information
camera
strong
captured
enough
the
to
masked
identify a
suspect approaching the front
That
porch of
absence
the
tells its own
residence
story
prior to the actual
about the
physical
nature of the
intrusion.
crime
During
and
this
about the
initial
silence
appearance on
surrounding
camera,
it.
the suspect was not
Behind
carrying
the
any
scenes
bags or
publicly,
visible
the case
tactical
appears
equipment.
stagnant.
They simply
But
walked up to the front
investigators
door,
insist otherwise.
observed the immediate
Former
surroundings,
FBI
and
agent
quietly
Jennifer
left the area.
Coffindaffer
This
has
was a
stated that
highly
the case is
calculated
active
scouting
across
mission
all
designed
fronts.
to gather visual
that the volume
intelligence.
of incoming
The
information
suspect
is
was
overwhelming,
actively probing the
that
perimeter
investigators
and
are
testing the
processing
exact
leads
field of view
continuously.
of the security cameras.
If that is accurate,
This preliminary
then the
visit
lack of
strongly
public
suggests that
updates
the
is not due
suspect
to
was mapping the
inactivity,
terrain before
but
launching their
restraint,
full assault
what we
on the
still don't
residence.
know.
The situation
Even now,
escalated
critical elements
dramatically a
remain
few hours later.
undisclosed.
Between
full significance
1:45
of
and
January
1:47 in the morning,
The
the smart home
contents of the
security
Uber video.
system logged a
The
second
motive
and final
investigators
approach to the
believe
house.
they understand the
Verified
identity of
reporting
the
from
masked
Fox News
individual.
and the
Each
Times of
one
India
represents a missing
confirmed that the
piece.
suspect
And
returned
without
to the
those
front
pieces,
porch with a much
the picture
darker
remains
purpose. This time,
incomplete.
the individual
The
was
porch
fully
figure.
prepared for a physical
At the
extraction.
center of the case is
The
still one
high-definition
image.
camera
A
recorded
man
a male figure
standing on a porch,
approximately 5
face
feet 9
covered,
inches to 5
identity
feet 10
unknown.
inches tall.
Referred
He was
to
wearing a dark
online
mask
simply as
to completely
porch
conceal his
guy.
facial features from the
Despite
lens.
weeks of
He
investigation,
was wearing thick gloves
despite
to prevent
national
leaving any
attention,
fingerprint evidence
despite
on the
federal
surfaces of the
involvement,
home.
no
He was
one has
armed with a
publicly
visible
identified
firearm,
him.
indicating
He
a
remains a
readiness to
silhouette,
use lethal violence.
a presence without a
Most
name,
notably,
a
he was
central
now carrying
figure
a black backpack
without a face.
manufactured by the brand
Someone
Ozark
knows something.
Trail. The sudden addition of the
Investigators believe
backpack
the
is a
answer
critical
is not
detail
distant,
for the forensic
not hidden in a
investigation.
database,
It heavily
not
indicates
buried in
that the
theory,
suspect brought
but
specific
held
tools or
by
supplies
someone,
necessary for the
someone in
execution
the
of their
Tucson
plan
community,
or for restraining the
someone
victim.
who saw something,
He stood menacingly
but
before
did
the
not
locked door of
recognize
the
its importance at
84-year-old
the time.
woman under the clear
A
gaze
vehicle,
of the night vision
a person,
camera.
a conversation,
And then, the most crucial
a
piece of
moment that
digital
felt
evidence simply
ordinary
vanished from the
until
server.
everything
The
changed.
security camera was abruptly
The
disconnected
unrecognized
from the
detail
wireless
cases
network.
like this
The live
often
video
turn on
feed
small
was entirely
details,
severed.
things
The
that do
digital
not seem
recording stopped
significant
dead in
when
its
they happen,
tracks.
but
The screen
become
went
critical in
completely
hindsight.
black. There
The
is
FBI
absolutely
has
no
asked
footage
residents
showing
to
the
go
suspect
back
actually
through
opening
their
the door.
memories, through
There is
their
no
camera
audio
footage,
recording of a
through
violent
their
struggle
messages,
or a forced
and
entry.
look again,
The system
because
designed
what
to capture
appeared
the
to be
crime was
nothing
blinded at the exact
may not
moment
have
the
been
crime
nothing at all.
commenced. The suspect
Time is
plunged
the
the
enemy,
entire scene
with
into
each
total
passing
digital
day.
darkness.
The
What
gap
happened in the
grows wider
terrifying blind spot of that
between what
disconnected
happened
security system?
and what can still
How did the
be
suspect
recovered?
transition from standing
Memory
outside
fades.
on the porch
Footage
to
is
standing
overwritten.
inside the secure house?
Details
This
blur,
brings us to the
and
most
the window for
baffling and
clarity
deeply
begins to
disturbing
close.
revelation of the entire
Where that
forensic
leaves the
investigation. We must return
At
our
this
focus
moment,
to the
the case
absolute
exists
lack
in
of
a state of
structural
tension
damage at the
between
primary crime scene.
evidence and
According to the
uncertainty,
comprehensive crime scene
silence and
analysis reported
speculation,
by CBS
hope
News and
and
the
reality.
Associated Press seasoned
The
investigators,
structure of the crime is becoming
meticulously
clearer.
examined every
The
window,
pattern is emerging,
every door frame,
but the
and every
identity
single locking
remains
mechanism
missing.
on the sprawling
At
property.
this point, nearly
They found
every known
absolutely
detail in
nothing
the
out of
case
the
has been
ordinary.
examined.
There
The
was no broken
timeline,
glass
the
scattered on the
surveillance,
floor of the
the
foyer.
messages,
There were no
the
metallic
DNA,
pry marks
the
from a
physical
crowbar on
layout
the
of
heavy
the
wooden
home.
front door.
But even with
the
all of
internal
that,
deadbolts were
one
not
question
damaged
still
or tampered
remains
with.
unanswered.
The metal hinges were
actually
perfectly
happened
intact.
inside those
The main
41
entry
minutes?
point was left completely
The gap that
unmarred by the
defines the
intrusion.
case.
The physical
At
evidence
1:47
absolutely
a.m.,
contradicts the presence of an
camera goes
armed
dark.
and aggressive intruder,
2:12
violently
a.m.,
forcing their
motion
way
is
into the
detected.
home. Yet we
At
know for a fact the
2:28 a.m.,
suspect was there,
the
and we know they
pacemaker stops
successfully gained
transmitting.
entry.
41
The timeline
minutes.
grows even
Within
more
that window,
ominous when we examine the
14 minutes
transmitted
that
medical data.
investigators have
As
circled as
reported by the
critical.
Times of
A
India,
narrow
the
stretch of
digital
time where
connection to the
everything may have
pacemaker of the
happened,
victim was
and where
completely
almost
severed
nothing was
at
recorded.
exactly 2:30
What
in
the
the morning.
evidence tells
This
us
means
taken
there was a
together,
45-minute
the evidence
window of
does not
time
suggest
between the
chaos.
moment the security
It
camera
suggests structure.
went dark at
The camera
1:45
was
and the moment the
deliberately
medical
disabled.
device stopped
The
transmitting
suspect
vital
appeared
data.
prepared.
What horrors
The entry
occurred
was
during those
controlled.
45
The
agonizing
time
minutes
inside the
inside
home
the
was
dark
extended.
and silent house?
The exit
The
appears
unbroken locks
coordinated.
present
These are
investigators
not
with
the
an almost
characteristics of an
impossible
impulsive
scenario to
act.
solve.
They are
If the door was
indicators
not
of
breached by
planning,
brute physical
weak
force,
points.
then the suspect either
But this
possessed a
case
physical
also
key
reveals
to
something
the
else.
residence, or they
Not
used
just
a
what
highly
happened,
sophisticated
but how
electronic
it was
device
able
to
to
clone
happen.
the smart lock
The
signal.
illusion of
There is
security
also a
Nancy's
third,
home had
far
visible
more tragic
security.
possibility
A
that haunts the
front-facing
detectives.
camera.
Did
A
the suspect
reinforced
somehow
security
trick an
gate.
84-year-old
While both had
woman into
limitations,
willingly opening
the
her own
camera,
front door at
mounted
2
in an
o'clock in the
accessible
morning?
position,
Could they have used a familiar
neutralized
voice
in
or a
seconds,
fabricated emergency to lure her out of the safety of
silenced.
her secure bedroom?
The gate,
The
strong
pristine
as it
condition of the
was,
door is the
protected only
terrifying
one point of
centerpiece
entry.
of this
And
entire
according
mystery.
to the evidence,
It shifts the entire
suspect
narrative
did
from
not
a violent
challenge it.
random
He
home
avoided it.
invasion
He
to a
waited beside
deeply
it.
calculated and
While another
possibly
route was
intimate
used,
betrayal.
security
Someone
in this case
bypassed
did
the
not
locks
fail.
without
It
leaving a
was
single
bypassed.
microscopic scratch
Single
on the
point
middle.
vulnerability.
Who could possibly
This
orchestrate
case
such a
highlights a critical
seamless and
principle.
silent entry into a
single point of
fortified home?
security creates
Do
a
you believe
single
the
point of
intruder had
focus.
inside
And
knowledge of the
anyone who
house
has studied
layout,
the
or was
system
this a highly
will not
sophisticated
attack it
technological
directly. bypass
executed
executed
by a professional.
The time
Share your
delay.
theories with us in the
Then there
comments
is the
below.
delay.
While the local
Nancy's
police
pacemaker
departments and
stopped
federal
transmitting
agencies
at
grappled with the
2:28
mystery of the
a.m.
unlocked door,
Her family
they
was not alerted
immediately began
until nearly
searching for
10
any
hours
digital
later,
breadcrumbs
when a
left
friend
behind
noticed
in the
her
wake of the
absence from a
disconnected
scheduled church
security
service.
system. The
10
suspect
hours.
clearly
No
believed
alert
that
triggered.
severing the
No
local
system
wireless
flagged
network
the
connection
disconnection.
would permanently
No immediate
erase their
check-in.
physical presence from the
10
digital
hours
record.
where no
They
one
were
knew she was
completely
gone.
wrong. The
Why that
investigation
matters for
took a
individuals
massive
living
leap
alone,
forward when federal
especially
authorities
elderly
stepped in to
individuals
assist
with
the local
medical
detectives
devices.
with the technical
Time
aspects
is
of the
critical.
case.
A simple
According to
check-in
detailed
system,
reports from
a morning
CBS
call,
News and
a
Fox
scheduled
News,
message,
the Federal Bureau of
an alert if
Investigation
no response is
collaborated
received,
directly with the tech
could
giant
reduce
Google,
hours to
which is the
minutes.
parent company
It
of
would
the
not
Nest security
necessarily
system.
prevent the crime,
Through advanced digital
it could change
forensics
what
and
happens
complex
after.
server data extraction,
January
the federal
11th
agents
teaches,
and Google
the significance
engineers
of
were able
January
to
11
reach deep
extends
into the
beyond the
back-end
timeline.
cloud servers
It
and
highlights
retrieve the
something more
corrupted
subtle.
data. They
Suspicious
successfully recovered the
behavior
crucial
rarely
video
looks
footage
suspicious in
that
real
the
time.
suspect had
A dog
intentionally
barking at
attempted to
night,
destroy
a
by
person
cutting
near
the
a
network
property,
connection.
a
This
vehicle parked where it
miraculously
usually
recovered
isn't.
video provided the
moments feel
high-resolution
ordinary
images of the
until
masked
something happens,
suspect,
and
holding
then
the
they
weapon
become
and
evidence.
carrying the black
When the
Ozark Trail
FBI is
backpack.
asking the
But the
community
digital
to
realm
revisit those
was not the
moments,
only place where the
because what
suspect
looked
made
like
a critical
nothing
and potentially
may
fatal
have
error.
been the beginning.
The most significant physical
The role
breakthrough
of
in the early
attention.
days of the investigation
lesson is not
did not happen
complex,
inside the
but
pristine
it is
walls
difficult.
of the house.
It
It
requires
happened out in the
attention.
harsh elements of the
Not
desert.
after something
Specialized
goes
search
wrong,
teams meticulously
but
combing
before.
the surrounding desert
The
landscape
present
and the
reality.
immediate physical vicinity
53
of the
days
property
ago,
discovered
in
a
the early
discarded
hours
piece
of
of
the morning,
clothing. They
a
found a
camera went
single
dark.
glove lying
Motion was
abandoned near the
detected.
residence.
A pacemaker
According to
fell
investigative reporting from
Somewhere
CBS
within
News
those
and
41
Fox
minutes,
News, forensic technicians
Nancy
quickly
Guthrie was
determined
taken
that
from the
this
home she had lived in
specific
for more than
glove
50
visually
years.
matched the exact
She has
type
not
of
been
gloves
seen
worn by
since.
the masked suspect in the
investigation
recovered porch
continues.
video footage.
The FBI
The
is
suspect
still
had
there.
worn the thick
Still
gloves
in the
specifically
neighborhood.
to avoid
Still
leaving
asking
fingerprint
questions
evidence on the door
about the vacant
handles,
house,
but in their apparent
the
haste to
workers in
flee
the
the
area,
active scene,
the
they
activity
dropped one of
before
them
the
on the
abduction.
ground. The state
The
crime lab
DNA
analysis
recovered
of the
from the
recovered
scene.
glove
They are
yielded
still
the most
building the
vital
case,
piece of
piece
physical
by
forensic
piece.
evidence in
But
the
the
entire
answer
case
is
file.
missing.
Laboratory technicians
structure is there.
successfully extracted
The
a
pattern is
viable
there.
DNA
The
profile from
timeline
the
is there.
biological
But
material
the
left
answer
inside the
is
fabric
not.
of the glove.
No name,
The extracted
no
genetic
arrest,
material
no
belonged to an
resolution.
unknown male individual.
community answer.
This isolated DNA
Investigators
profile is
believe
now
the
the
final
golden
piece does
ticket
not
for the
exist in
prosecution
isolation.
and the
It
investigative
exists in
team.
memory.
It firmly
in something
establishes a
someone
direct
saw,
biological link between
but
a
did not
specific
understand.
unknown male
A
suspect
detail,
and the physical
a moment,
crime scene of the
a person
disappearance.
out of place,
The momentous discovery
something
of
that
the
did not
suspect
feel
DNA
important.
on a matching glove
At the
elevates
time,
the investigation
the
from a
unfinished
simple
case.
missing persons case
Nancy Guthrie
to
is
a
still out
massive
there.
federal
Or
criminal
the truth
manhunt.
about what happened
It
to her
provides
is
law enforcement
held
agencies us with a definitive
someone
and
who may not
scientifically
yet
sound way
realize
to
what
identify
they
the
know.
perpetrator once the
final line,
suspect
day
is eventually
53.
apprehended.
No arrest,
The combination
no
of the
confirmed
recovered
suspect,
back-end video
no
footage
answers.
and the
cameras
isolated
are
male
silent.
DNA profile
The timeline is
completely
incomplete.
shatters the
The
carefully
investigation is
constructed
ongoing.
illusion of a flawless
And one
crime.
question remains.
The suspect may have
The same
successfully
question that has
bypassed
been
the
there from the
physical
beginning.
locks and silenced
Who
the
was
digital
already
cameras,
inside her home?
but they could not